A few short months ago, I was still caring for my mother in the final days of her life, and that world is a very small world. And so getting up in front of you, this is a very big world all of a sudden. I have an opportunity to share a particular portion of my story about how I discovered that God would and could do for me what I could not do for myself. The reality of my life is that beginning in about second grade, I began a descent into fear and anxiety, and soon, that early in life, quite a bit of addictiveness. And as it gained momentum in my life, by the time I hit college, I was very locked down. It was a permanent situation. It was one that I could not escape from. This fear had gripped me. It had affected how I perceived the world, how I perceived God, and certainly how I perceived myself. I grew up here in Oklahoma City. I'm the oldest of two girls. My parents are Doris Day and Cary Grant in that touch of mink. There was just something about them, that the romance that they had, there was something about the relationship they had with one another that was exactly that, only my dad was my mother's boss and he didn't have as much money as Cary Grant. But we were, in those early years, we were secure kids, we really were. And we had a sense of family, we had a sense of home, and things were good. But an intruder came into our world when I was 7. The intruder was my mother became ill. She began to exhibit all kinds of symptoms of an undiagnosed illness at the time, and that brought fear into our home. Early on, being the oldest, I was charged with those normal child things. Be a good girl, take good care of your sister, don't upset your mother. And I was taught, basically in that little instruction, that I needed to take care of myself, that I couldn't really expect anyone else to take care of me. And fear began to be the intruder. Our reality over the years that went on is that the anxiety that was growing in me began to affect all the things that you need as a kid. It began to affect school and how school worked for me. The early stories that they told about me is that I was just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But then they began to tell me that I was trouble, that I was having problems in school, that I wasn't living up to my potential, and that I was really falling far short of what they knew my best was. And that was really purely the function of this fear that had come in. As I moved along in my journey, I really began to do some interesting behaviors, like pretending to be sick at school so that I could go home. I wanted to be at home. I didn't want to be separated during these things that we were encountering. The diagnosis eventually came. Mom had multiple sclerosis. It was a progressive kind, but it turned out to be a slow progressing kind, and it became part of our family for the next 40 or so years. Early, my mom would tell me stories. She would tell me particularly this story. Laura, when you were a very little girl, we had to come looking for you to find you because you were so content to play quietly alone. But later, the stories changed. The stories began to be, that I was troubling, that I was having some difficulty. Obviously, there were things going on. I was handling my anxiety about home in an acting out kind of way. In this season, I began to act out sexually with my friends. Imagine this as a 2-year-old taking on a sort of predatory kind of behavior with her friends, just trying to cope with the anxiety. I began to lie. I began to avoid what I never avoided before. Avoid people, avoid family, avoid talking, avoid notice, only to swap it around and work hard to be noticed. There was a memory that was etched into me during that season. The day that my mom got sick, everybody had surrounded her bed, and this memory, I had knowledge of what the details were, but oddly, the memory looked like a still photograph, and there was nobody in it but me. And in this memory, it was just stuck. It was just a stuck place of emotion, but I was stuck in this place that wouldn't move. This was it was a still photo. It wasn't a movie. And in this still photo, I was so aware of myself and so aware of my pain, but I could only see what I could see. I could see out the window to my right. I could see the sunny backyard, and I could see the weeping willow swaying gently in the breeze and my swing set. And this was my memory. The odd thing is, as I progressed through life, this silly memory would come flooding back on me, and it would just grab hold of me and take me down, and I would addict over it. I would flee to porn. I would act out with people. I would lie. I would stay out of school. I would leave school for weeks at a time at college. That doesn't work, by the way. And but it was this powerful, powerful memory, and it just remained untouched. And I tried to manage myself with a religious life. I tried to manage myself with truth about God. I tried to manage myself with good disciplines with God. I tried to do a lot of things. But you know what was happening is that the inner world of who I was going untouched. And I had no idea how to approach God with these things. And it was in that context that God began to unfold himself to me. First, I was born again truly of his Spirit in 1987. I experienced some quick healing from the Lord as he revealed his loving kindness to me. Because he did some quick healing in me, I was able to have an immoral relationship for the first time. I entered into a relationship and stayed with that for about 3 years, and then the Lord came after me a second time. And in that place, he said, "Laura, I love you. What are you doing?" And I did not know how to receive that love, no concept at all. What he began to do to me over that year is he began to work repentance in me, which for me wasn't about stopping behavior. I mean, it was stopping behavior, but it wasn't about stopping behavior. Repentance for me began to be about turning to God, beginning to turn to God with the things that I was always fleeing to. I'm going to turn to him when this picture floods my soul. I'm going to turn to him when the addictiveness is rising. I'm going to turn to him. But I didn't know him well. I didn't know how to receive his love. So that landed me a couple of years later at a Living Waters training, particularly 9 years later, at a Living Waters training, and the Lord encountered me in that memory. Nobody did anything. Nobody said anything. Nobody made anything happen. It was just the memory, and I was going to have to go to him with it. And in that place, God began to speak truth into my soul. And this truth was not what I expected. I expected God to speak to me revisionist history. When I said to him, "Father, is my mother going to be okay?" I expected him to say to me, "Of course she's going to be okay." I really expected that. But instead he said, "No, she's not going to be okay," which was true. And then I said, "Father, am I going to be okay?" And I knew the answer to that, right? God works everything together for them that love God and those called according to his purpose. Of course you're going to be fine. But the Lord of life said, "No, you're not going to be okay, but I'm here." And when he met me in that place of truth, I was able to bring to him all that fear that I had always carried and tried to manage. And he began to meet me. And in those previous 9 years in my walk with the Lord, he had really done some things that, broke the power of addiction in my life. But I would stumble. I was always persistently stumbling. But what happened that day, for reasons that I don't fully understand, is he made me secure here. I'm a nervous person, so secure here. And when he did that, the power of addiction was broken. And I could receive his truth in a responsive way. And I began to go toward him as Lord of life. I began to believe him as my Father. I began to let him nurture me, and I began to actually mature in the core of who I was. And so that's a brief picture of one part of my story.